Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I got to tell you something, people. If you've been in the Philly area from after 1980 and you listen to classic rock and you don't know who my guest is, I don't know what's wrong with you. Because it's funny, I started listening to her back when she started at YSP, and then I moved to the West Coast. And didn't come back hardly at all to visit. But then when I moved back 7 years ago, she was on WMGK. And she's been around. She's a Philadelphia icon, and I have no problem saying that. And she'll probably say, no, I'm not, but she is. And my guest is Debbi Calton. How you doing, Debbie?
I just happened to buck the system and last a long time somehow. But thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that.
I want to start off with that. You also work now for Outside FM. But
yes.
As someone who's been in the industry, and we'll get to that for a very long time, where do you see the industry going, and what is happening now with like Andre Gardner? Like you go, holy shit. But tell me, what's your view as someone who knows the industry probably better than most?
I'm having a really hard time with it, honestly. It makes me very, very sad. I mean, I've seen it coming for a while. I can't say that I anticipated anything when I decided to retire in 2019. However, I saw the direction that things were going in and the way that companies were, starting to treat their employees and expecting people to take on more than one job, taking on 3 or 4 hats or whatever, and bypassing contracts, which happened in Andre's case. Andre had just signed like a 4-year contract. I believe it was that just months before, so that didn't mean anything. DeBella got out a little bit after I did. I champion all the people that I know who are still working, but I know that it's very, very difficult in the climate these days. And every week you read about more people being canned and more voice, like somebody from another market coming in to voice track a show. And it's like, particularly at MGK, legacy meant something. At YSP, it did too. Actually, I was lucky to get in there, as being a non-Philadelphian back in the early 80s. And I became accepted by Philadelphians, which is not an easy thing to do, but somehow I did. And I'm grateful for that. But I see so many of my friends being affected who are still in the business being affected by this now. I will say, when I was in Philly last year, actually just about this time, I got the Broadcast Pioneers Award, and Andre's picking that up himself very soon. He had me into the radio station while I was there. Actually, I was there a little bit later. I was there several months ago because my husband was playing in town. And I went over to see him and to pop on the air real quickly. And I didn't see anybody in the hallways. I maybe saw 4 people while I was there. And it used to be bustling and hustling and all kinds of activity. And it felt like a ghost town. And it made me very sad to see that. And I don't anticipate it getting any better as long as you have owners who they say that they care about, their personalities and their legacy, but they don't. They're looking at the bottom line money, and I can understand as a business you have to do that. But I fear that literally the personality is going out of radio now.
Well, it's funny, and the personality is so important, and they don't get that because, I still listen to terrestrial radio. In my car, I can listen to Amazon. I can listen to, I'll listen to Amazon if I'm going around a while. I'll listen to an album. And I can listen to Sirius. My wife always listens to Sirius in her car. But what's funny is I click from commercials when there's commercials. But if there's a detail, like if you wanted to hear Andre, you'd click back and hear. Or even Pierre Robert, on the other hand. Pierre does his thing. You wanted to hear them because you have nostalgia with them. And it's just crazy that these stations, there's going to be a whole generation of people who don't know what on-air personality is. They'll just know someone who's, hi, this is such and such from such and such. And it's really sad for someone from you. It must hurt a little bit. It would bother me. I mean, it would be like, you're fucking up the business I helped create.
Yeah, it does. It does hurt. I mean, when Sirius and, when satellite radio first came in, everybody's like, oh, that's the death of, terrestrial radio. But no, I mean, we could look out the window and say, oh my gosh, in Valley Kenwood, it's raining right now, it's sunny. You could be involved with the community. You could refer to places, the Acme, you could refer to the Spectrum back then. You could refer to all these things, and people love that. They love that community. And as I said, there are, for instance, Tony Harris, who I worked with for many years, who took over in Andre's slot. And in Tony's slot, which actually Tony wears like 5 different hats at the radio station. He programs the music. He does the production. He's now, doing an air shift. And whoever, I'm not even sure who it was that they brought in, but they're using, again, somebody from another market that's not going to be able to, it's going to be generic, They're not going to have the knowledge, more than likely, of what we had, living in classic rock, working in classic rock. I mean, I started in 1976 in Charlotte. That's, rock was new, classic rock was new then. So there's a perspective, as did DeBella, as did Andre, as did many of us. And Pierre, God bless him, still holding on there. But there's something to be said to have that history of the music that you're playing and not think of it just as product. And
it's funny you say about the music because I went to Stockton State, which is in New Jersey, and it was now University, and there was a bunch of us from the Philly area, and there was a bunch of us from the New York area, and the Philadelphia area. I remember when the Hooters played, and we all told all these guys from you got to check these guys out. And Tommy Conwell opened, and us, they were icons, and only because we were local to Philly and listened to Philly radio, we knew, and they blew our other friends' socks off. They're like, "Oh my God, why haven't we heard of these people?" I said, "Because it's Philadelphia," and you're right. People from other areas don't know the local artists. Like I saw you post something about Low Cut Connie. If you're not from Philly, you don't know who he is, but he's an amazing showman and he's going to blow up huge. But someone out of the area wouldn't know that. And that's what's so important because, as you said earlier about Philadelphia, Philadelphia has a reputation. Scrapple, cheesesteak, tasty cake, throwing snowballs at Santa Claus, which is bullshit. But it's right. A radio personality in this area has to know the area, else people are going to turn.
Oh, absolutely. You make a mistake. I remember one of the first times I was on the air at YSP. I don't know what I was thinking. It just, something came out of my mouth about, I think I said Born to Run. It was Bruce Springsteen's first album. And holy shit, did the phones blow up. And I don't know why I said it, because I knew that Wild the Innocent, I knew what came before that, Greetings. But somehow that's just what came out of my mouth. And, people were like, oh, well, you're not from around here, are they? You say that. I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. It just came out of my mouth. But yes, you're absolutely right. They will turn on you, but they will also embrace you if they feel like you are one of them. Everybody, I think all my listeners knew that I lived in media, my hometown media, Delaware County, Delco, because you have that personal relationship. And I want to say, as you're mentioning the Hooters, I've got a Hooters Gold record right over there hanging on my wall.
That's awesome.
And about Low Cut Connie, I was shocked. I'm living in Hudson, New York now. We've been up here for several years. I was shocked when I came up here and I was like, Low Cut Connie, and nobody knew who I was talking about. More and more people are finding out now. We just went to see Low Cut Connie at Daryl's house a couple of nights ago, and they're getting play on the local Woodstock radio station. And as you said, and Adam is working it. I mean, he's driven. He's so talented, and he'll get this whole country to know and love him. It won't take too long. And plus, his whole band is fantastic. But yeah, regionality is big. I mean, it really does, mean something. And in radio now, blurring the lines of what's local, what's not, that's going to get lost. And also being able to champion local bands, which has been much harder to do over the years because programming is so, it's very formatted. Programming at big commercial stations. So you can't just slip in. Like, I would always love to at least slip in a mention of somebody. It's like, well, they're playing tonight, this place or that. but to be able to get one of the songs on the air, it's difficult. The Hooters might not even be able to break in Philadelphia now. Luckily, when they came around, and the Hooters were when I moved to Philly, 1983. What a great local music scene. Like I said, Tommy Conwell, Robert Hazard. And this is funny. The radio station that I worked at in Chicago, we used to do a new music hour, Wednesday nights, whatever. And we played Robert Hazard. And I remember looking at the album cover and going, wow, this new wavy guy and all this, because it was Escalator of Life and all that kind of stuff. And then you move to Philadelphia. It's like, wow, everybody knows Robert Hazard. He's huge here. And he ended up becoming a friend. And my husband ended up playing in a band with him and everything. Nicest guy in the world. But that was truly a time when you could champion local music. Not only just talk about them, but play them. Have them on the air to do interviews. The relationships cultivated back then were incredible. They were so grateful, and we were so grateful to have the access to them. And again, Philadelphia, and there are other markets too, certainly, that had great local music scenes. But boy, what a time to be in Philly in those early 80s and on through the 80s. Just incredible.
Now, your career.
Am I allowed to drink wine on our?
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
Your career. You started. Were you a music lover who decided to get into radio, or were you someone who just, for some reason, heard radio, wanted to get into radio, and then started to really love classic rock? What was your path?
Totally about music. Totally about music. I used to listen to the radio when I was little. Or when I was younger, I shouldn't say little. But my dad's an organist. We always had music in the house. I remember the earliest albums I remember at home, like Kingston Trio. He would have a lot of the comedy albums like Bob Newhart and, Bill Cosby at the time, things like that. But I love music. I mean, at 12 years old, that's when Jefferson Airplane, Surrealistic Pillow came out. Creedence was coming out. We're talking 67. And I was living in California then. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot, which was, in retrospect, I didn't like it at the time, but in retrospect was great, because then you can learn different things and different tastes and different radio stations across the country. But I could listen to the San Francisco and Sacramento radio stations, and they were playing a lot. Back then it was like anything. Like it could be rock, it could be pop, it could be maybe even a little bit country. That you could hear all this music on one radio station, and so I loved music. I never thought about being on the radio. I built my little album and 45 collection. My dad was also into like whatever the latest technology was at the time. He used to build Heathkit stereos, so we always had like the smell of solder in the house. But he got me this little tiny tape recorder. I don't even know like what size of tape that would be, like a 3-inch tape or something. I had Creedence Clearwater Revival on a reel-to-reel tape. Just totally into it. The first concert I saw was Creedence. The second one was Jethro Tull. Anyway, so just always loved music, and everywhere we moved, I'd listen to whatever cool radio station there was. I went to college in Guilford College, Greensboro, North Carolina, a liberal arts school, Quaker school. They had a fantastic radio station, and all of my friends there at school were working on the radio station. I never thought of being on the radio, but I would go with my friends and be in the background, and I'd help pick out music. And they seem to remember me being on the air there. I don't. But there I did cultivate, again, even more, a love of music and how you can put things together and the stories and messages that you can also weave. And I left, as we often did back in the 70s, to go find myself for a semester. But I needed my parents to keep paying the bills. So I thought, well, if I go to a trade school, they'll pay for that, and I can. And so I sent up for all these trade school pamphlets and almost became a welder, honestly, because welding, you're always going to need that kind of society. I went to a broadcast school instead in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it turned out the broadcast school was, because I just thought, well, it'd be fun to see what they do. And I thought maybe I like to write. also. And I thought, well, maybe I could write for a radio station, write commercials or something like that. And so I went to this broadcast school, and it was terrible, awful. I didn't know anything about equipment, but even I, with no experience, knew that their equipment was crap. And in fact, I mean, it was a really shady business. The owner ended up getting arrested for pedophilia. I mean, it was just. But since my parents had paid into the school, I thought I need to make something of this. So I decided to just go knock on doors and to just try to get an internship. The broadcast school wasn't doing that for me. And so I went to this little AM daytime radio station in Charlotte, North Carolina, WRPL. This is 1976. And just said, hey, I'm stuck in this broadcasting school. And they laughed when I told them like what school I enrolled in. It's like, yeah, nobody's going to hire you because you went there. And I said, well, can I just learn here? Can I do anything behind the scenes? I'll get coffee. I'll write copy. I just said anything. I just want to learn. And so they said, sure, we don't have to pay you. And within 2 weeks, they were asking me to go on the air. And well, everybody had a Southern accent in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I had such a Southern accent. And I was very self-conscious of that because that wasn't my native accent. But since I'd been in college at college in Greensboro, I developed a Southern accent. But they were like, no, we think you'd be really good. And I just thought it was horrible, and I have some of the tapes to prove it. But I ended up doing it. And then they had me on the morning show, like within a couple of months. And then I was there for 2 years. And by the end of my 2 years, I was the program director. I mean, I was doing it all. And it was a daytime station, again, which means you turn it on at sunrise, you turn it off at sunset. Your power is limited. There were some days in the winter I was on for the whole day. I'd come in, turn it on at 7:30 and turn it off at 5:30. What a learning experience, though. I learned how to do everything. Again, a very small station. I don't even know our listening audience. We didn't even reach like probably to the edges of the Charlotte, region. But I learned how to do everything. I learned how to go on sales calls. I learned to a degree how to deal with equipment. I really was able to hone on air skills. I learned how to deal with record companies, which were a thing back then. They're not really anymore. But record reps and the artists. I learned it all in that little radio station. So it was a great stepping stone. And at that point, I was like, and then I lost my job. And again, this was the 70s. So 1978. They hired, and I was doing so much stuff and working at a very low, I don't even remember. I think I was making $120 a month or something. It was ridiculous. They brought a man in from another station who had a name, and they paid him like twice as much as I was getting. And I made a deal about it. I said, this is not right. I'm doing all this stuff. And they were like, yeah, but he's got a name. And I said, well, I've established a name for myself here. And the owner was a good old boy. And he said to me, Debbie, we taught you everything you know, little girl. You owe us. We don't owe you anything. Well, I had a decision to make. And I was, maybe 22 years old at that point. It's like, do I stick it out, and just go with this, or do I make a stand? And Women's Lib was coming around and everything. So I took a stand, and I ended up in an EEOC lawsuit with them it dragged on for years, and they ended up changing the format to a religious format so they could avoid.
Such bullshit.
So I'm proud of doing that. Boy, was it a lesson. And I saw it throughout a lot of my career. I mean, not as severely as it was there, because it became unspoken. They spoke it out loud there. It was like, you're a little girl. We don't, just go get married or something like that. I don't feel like my salary was probably never equal, to any man ever, even up until my last days at MGK, probably. But I had more confidence. I mean, that was scary at 22 years old. And I had to go back and live with my parents, which was really everything I owned, which were albums, loaded in my truck. little pickup truck, and I moved back to Florida. But then I thought, I'm not going to let this keep me down. And I really enjoyed this. I think I found something. My parents for 10 years easily kept asking me when I was going to go back to school and get my degree. And I was like, you know what? I said, this can be a career. And it turned out to be a 40 whatever. I mean, it still is a career. I'm still doing the online radio. So it turned out okay. But, there was a really big bump in the road at the very beginning. I could have just turned away from it. But by then I was pretty hooked. I liked it. And also at that time, there was still a lot of freedom in what you played on the air. It's not like I could go in, like everybody always says, oh, you must take all your favorite records and play them. It's like, no, that's not it. There usually is going to be a format. That first station in Charlotte, there was no format. The only provision was because the big radio station, the big commercial radio station in town played lots of Led Zeppelin. We prided ourselves on not playing Led Zeppelin, which crushed me because I am a huge Led Zeppelin fan. But that was the only formatic, kind of dictate. And then as I went on to stations, and I kind of, they say in radio, you're supposed to just try to keep going up into different, better markets, bigger markets and that sort of thing. So from Charlotte, I went to, where'd I go? Well, I worked a couple of just like part-time things in between just to keep going. But I was in Tampa, I was in Orlando, and then I was in Denver, and then Chicago, and then Philly in 1983.
How did Philly come about? Because YSP was, well, now it's sports, but it was, I remember my brother always played YSP. My older brother played YSP, and I would listen to it. You listen to what your older brother listens to, and he loved classic rock. And so, how did you break into that? Because YSP, it was the Philadelphia market, and it was a very competitive market.
Oh boy, did I find that out. When I was in Chicago, I was with my ex-husband, who I had met in Orlando. And he had gotten, when we were working in Orlando, he had gotten an offer he got an offer in Denver. And I had to decide, okay, am I going to go with this guy that had just started a relationship, or I'm going to further my career here? And I decided, all right, let's take this relationship thing a step further. So I went to Denver, and I ended up getting a full-time job there. Then he got a job offer in Chicago. So then I'm faced again with, do I follow him, or do I stay here? And it was funny because the job that he was exiting in Denver, that station actually offered me his job if I wanted to stay in Denver. But I was like, oh, I'm probably going to move to Chicago. So I went with him to Chicago. We got married. We got divorced. Then our station in Chicago, which also was in a very competitive situation, much like MMR and YSP were in Philly. But it was the Loop, WLUP, and WMET, and I was working at WMET. Our station, unfortunately, was sold to, I don't even remember what company it was now, but they came in and they said, we just want to assure, they had a big meeting, we want to assure you that there will be no attrition. And I didn't know what the word attrition meant, so I had to go home and look it up. And it's like, oh, good, we're all safe. Of course, the next day they started firing everybody. I was the very last, and I mean the very last person to hold on by my fingertips to that station because my union lawyer said, don't quit. They're going to have to pay you something, some sort of severance. So just hang on as long as you can. And they put me in all kinds of shifts. I think I've been doing a 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. shifts, something like that. And they put me on the public affairs like at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning. They wouldn't even call me in for weeks at a stretch. Kept holding on. And finally they just said, okay, go. And they paid me my severance, and I took a little trip, and then I came back. And all the people that I worked with, or a lot, not all of them, but a lot of them had relocated to Philadelphia because Chicago, again, if you worked on the radio in Chicago, which at the time I think was the third market, it may still be, I don't know. But a lot of them were able to assimilate into Philadelphia. So I thought, well, let me go visit some of my friends who've landed in Philadelphia. And I had set up an interview with Charlie Kindle, who was the program director at the time at WMMR. And I got into Philly, and he wasn't able to meet with me for some reason. And knowing a little bit about the rivalry, I thought, well, let me go over to YSP and talk to the program director there, Michael Picozzi. And Michael's like, wait, you were gonna interview at MMR? You're hired right now, no matter what, because that competition. And so they didn't have a full-time shift for me there, but I worked in promotions, and I did part-time for a while, and then eventually ended up doing 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And then I don't even remember how many program directors I went through there, like 5, 6, and they moved me around, and then eventually they put me into middays where I was working after Howard Stern, which was also very interesting. And then I guess I was at YSP totally, in total for 10 years, 83 to 93.
Well, YSP, so, it's crazy with the Stern thing, because in 88, I started doing stand-up comedy, and it was at the Comedy Factory Outlet, which Clay Heary owned. And a lot of us got jobs at the door, so we would get better stage time and, and watch the masters. And the rivalry was unbelievable. Like, DeBella would host, and he would say, if anyone yelled at Stern, he'd have us throw the person out. And it's really amazing, because DeBella took over, he owned the city. And then Stern came in. What was it like when Stern started chipping away, working on that station? Because that even makes the rivalry more, and it makes you more of a commodity, because you're like, well, you know what? I could go to MMR if I went for more money. I mean, it must have been crazy. What was it like being on air and seeing that happen?
Well, I never thought about leaving YSP. I was pretty loyal to the station, even through all the different program directors that we had. It was awkward because I had friends at MMR. I didn't know DeBella at the time, but I remember being Rob Hyman from the Hooters. I remember being at his wedding, and I was standing in the food line right behind DeBella. And I thought, oh my God, don't let him turn around and see me, because he's going to give me shit. There had been some big Philadelphia magazine article about him, and somehow my name was in there. I don't even remember how I was, and I don't think I was quoted. I think somebody attributed something to me, whatever. But, and I just thought DeBella's going to really lay on me if he turns around and sees I'm behind him. It was funny when he came to MGK, because he was like, I just want to tell you, that I've known of you for all these years, and I respect what you do. And I was like, wow, I said, I didn't think you would even know who I was, because also all the stuff preceded DeBella too, the stuff that you would hear about him, that he had an ego and all of this, and he was just for himself. But working with him, we were very good friends at MGK. I really liked working with him, but I have to say, when that rivalry again was going on, it was very, it was tough. There was also, so Andy Bloom was the program director when he brought Howard in and everything. And there was kind of like, we don't want to hear you about anybody fraternizing, is that the right word, with the enemy, meaning MMR. And again, I had friends, that I would hang out with, that would come over to my apartment and stuff. And it's like, please don't let Andy find out, because he'll fire me, But it was that intense. It was really seriously intense. Speaking about comedy, when I went into the middays, I inherited, Randy Kotz had been on the air in that midday position before me, and he was doing the Kotz Comedy Corner, which in turn, when I started doing middays, turned into the Calton Comedy Corner. And that was really fun too, because a lot of these upcoming, like Chris Rock, before anybody knew who Chris Rock was, there he is on my show, Penn and Teller was a regular visitor. I had Danny DeVito, it was kind of, and I know that Rich Scheidner, comedian Rich Scheidner, is somebody that and you've known for a long time. When Howard Stern and Robin went on vacation, Andy paired Rich and me together to fill in for Howard and Robin, which also was interesting because people were so devoted to Howard and Robin. They were like, who is this guy and this girl trying to be Howard and Robin? Well, we weren't. We were just filling in. We weren't it was a man and a woman, but we weren't trying to be them at all. But I learned a lot from Rich, too, in those couple of weeks, certainly about comedic timing, because I stepped on his lines a couple of times. But boy, he was such a sweetheart to work with. I absolutely, and I'm delighted that I have a page, not a page, I have a part of a page of his book too, that he mentioned me. But that was really fun, except for all the pushback that we got from Howard fans. I was always afraid that Howard was going to call me on the air too. And he did mention me a couple of times, and he said he was going to call about, well, I think he mentioned me like after they came back from vacation, and people called and they said, hey, there's this guy, this girl who are trying to be you. And he's like, what are they trying to do? But thank God I was able to avoid that for the 5 years or whatever it was that I followed him.
Now, because of well, I'm a big 80s music fan, of classic rock and 80s, and I know you guys were classic rock, but what were the concerts you got to go to, and did you get to go to Live Aid? Was that something?
Oh my God. Well, I worked. I worked during the first half of Live Aid because we were the official station, official broadcast station. Although MMR, again, the rivalry, MMR found a way to get backstage and do all the stuff that we did not. We weren't able to. We had some people backstage, but MMR, they owned it. But I was working on the air and running, putting the acts on the air. And then I went to the second half of Live Aid after I got off the air that day. So I was there in time to see Led Zeppelin and Tina and Mick. And boy, what a day that was. How it was so hot in Veterans Stadium. That was a thrill. But yeah, concerts, boy, did I go to a lot of concerts. I have a book of all the stubs, but I finally decided I'd start saving them. And I had never counted them, but there are thousands and thousands. I mean, I saw Bruce Springsteen in Philly 50 times or so. We used to broadcast, from a lot of the concerts too. And stations would get comp tickets for just about everything. We'd be up in the press box at the Spectrum. When Billy Joel and Elton John did their 5-7 day residency, whatever it was, I was at every single one of those shows broadcasting. It was spectacular. It was phenomenal. After I retired, and the first time I had to buy concert tickets, I was like, oh my God.
That's weird, because in this show, I interview a lot of musicians, and I always tell my friends, I said, I'll get us the concert, I'll get us the comp, I'll get us backstage. And then me and my wife wanted to see Springsteen. I even sent a letter, because I interviewed Steven Van Zandt, to his PR guy. I said, hey, man, I interviewed him, whatever. We got in this local Jersey magazine, the interview, it was in the paper or whatever. I said, can you hook me up? And he couldn't. I'm the same way. I'm like, I don't want to pay for a concert because you're not used to it. I mean, you probably could still get free tickets in Philadelphia because everyone knows you.
In Philly, I probably could, because I actually thought about trying to go down to Philly for Springsteen. I didn't. And I still have some personal connections, like Adam Locutt-Connie. He's a very good friend. So I texted him and said, hey, can you put me on a list? So, we could go to that. Annie Haslam from Renaissance is also a very dear friend. And they just did their final tour when they played in Albany. She put me on the list there. And it was sweet because Renaissance was playing at the Scottish Rite Auditorium. No, was it Scottish Rite? Yeah, maybe it was.
That's in Collingswood.
Yeah, they were playing there as one of the final dates of this last tour. And she asked me if I would come down to host a show there. I was like, really? I said, you think like after, me being gone for 5 years? She's like, oh, no, we'd love to. But I wasn't able to make that. So again, I can call in some personal favors sometimes, but it was funny. When I went to see Adam and Locutt-Connie last week, I was telling Adam, we went backstage, I was telling Adam, I said, I don't want to be back here too long because we have a couple of seats at the bar and I don't want to lose our seats. He says, well, can't you use the Debbi Calton card? I said, the Debbi Calton card in New York means shit. I said, I can't use that card. I can use my husband, a musician, I can use his card now, maybe. I said, but, my name doesn't mean anything up here. That was kind of an interesting phenomena, although I was prepared for that when I retired, because we knew that we were probably going to move to New York. The pandemic happened literally right after I retired. Like I retired in December, the pandemic hit January, February. We stayed in media for a while until we moved up here. But I always knew that we had family in this area. And I love this area of New York. Although it's so weird still to say that I live in New York. Still very strange. I had a hard time with the World Series. It's like, it was exciting, but it's like, I can't root for a New York team, but I wasn't rooting against the Phillies. So And we still try to watch all the Eagles games, but they don't run them all on a
Right.
TV
That's
station.
that's what's funny when my wife moved to L.A. I was used to walking down. I lived in Burbank. I could walk to this one bar, the Bullseye Bar, at Black Angus, and I knew the bartenders. I get my seat, and I ended up having like 5 Eagles fans show up. But when my wife moved out, she was used to up at 1 o'clock. Well, I was used to getting up at 10 a.m. and they weren't on TV, so we had to go out a lot. When we moved back, because I was on the West Coast for over 20 years, my mind was so programmed that like I'd wake up at like 8:30, and I'd be like, we got to put on the pregame. She's like, no, it doesn't start till noon. So I want to ask you, because I wasn't in the area, YSP, did you leave when it switched to sports, or how did you end up at MGK? Because I wasn't here when and I didn't come back. My parents had moved. I wasn't back in my area, I think once in like from actually 90 to 2000 maybe, or 2005. I wasn't back. What happened with YSP and MGK?
Well, do you remember Ed Shockey at all?
Yeah, I remember Ed Shockey.
Okay, so Ed was working at YSP, and I remember my son was getting ready to celebrate his second birthday. We were planning the birthday party and everything. It was going to happen on a Saturday. I get a phone call from Ed Shockey that Friday night, and he said, well, just to warn you, he says, I've just been canned. He says, and they used the word changes. So I'm just giving you a heads up. I was like, what the hell? Ed, again, legacy DJ, the program director at this point was Tim Sabian. And Tim and I didn't get along, I don't feel like, very well. But still, I was still a team player. Particularly being right after Howard, my ratings were great. The ratings were great. That wasn't an issue. And we were also that weekend, or that following week, for the next couple of weeks, we were getting ready for some special programming. It was going to be the history of rock and roll. It was going to be a big splash. It's being heavily promoted. So we were all gearing up for that. And then Ed, he gets pulled in after a shift is over, and he gets let go. So all through my son's second birthday party, I'm like, what are we, it's like, do I worry about this, or it's just going to be what it is? And so finally I was like, okay, I can't do anything about it until I go into work Monday to try to determine what's happening. So I go in, and, Howard, my airship was supposed to start at 10, but Howard would go to 10:30, 10:45, whatever. And so I'm just waiting around outside of the air studio, as I always would. And then it's like 10:30, it's almost 10:45. And my program director, Tim, is in his office, and he'd been on the phone. So he gets off, and I said, so I guess I'm making a joke. I said, I guess I'm safe for today. He says, about that, could you step in my office? I was like, what? I said, were you going to wait till I was on the air? Because I could have feasibly been on the air at that point. He says, well, I've been busy with some stuff, and he says, we've decided to make some changes. And as he had told Ed, and he says, you've been very valuable to the station, and we appreciate your 10 years of service, but we're letting you go. So I went from being hopeful to okay then. And what was very bizarre, they had hired 2 out-of-towners. One, the guy who was taking over my shift was a guy named Surf Caldwell, who I'm now friends with. He's a big DC legacy jock, and it's like, well, why would a DC jock? Again, he was known regionally and why would he move to Philadelphia? Why wouldn't he stay down there where he's known? But at any rate, he had been hiding in the production studio while I'm getting the news, because I was going to be on my way into the air studio. He pops out of the production studio. He tries to give me a hug, and I'm like, too soon. Too soon. I'm still trying. And it was so bizarre, because that was my home. As I said, I had gone through so many program directors. I went to talk to the woman in charge of the business department. And I said, well, what do I do now? She said, well, just come back tomorrow and we'll figure it out. I said, I don't want to come back tomorrow. They don't want me here anymore. Can we do this now? It was just the most bizarre feeling. And even though I'd been a little prepared for it, it was still, like I said, I'd been there for, I think I was there longer than most everybody, since I had started there in '83. I had outlasted, like Anita was there, Pam Murley, Leslie Patton, Steve Sutton, Steve Trevelise, who I'm sure. Steve might have still been there when I was let go. But, it was just it was like, how do I leave here? This is my home. At any rate, it was very weird. So that was in October. I get a phone call sometime in December, and it was like, well, we think we've made a mistake. We want you back. And this was from the program director. And I said, what? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, first of all, do I have to give up my severance? It's like,
Right.
no. They were not going to give me back my old shift, the midday shift, but they had the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. slot, which I had done years before. So I was like, well, if I don't have to, if I'm getting my same salary, I don't have to give up my severance. Sure, I'll come back. And I was so excited. It was right before Christmas. So I started buying Christmas presents left and right, all over the place. I've got a job again. Well, I call at the beginning of January, and I keep getting put off by his secretary. And finally, I called the general manager. I said, what gives? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, I was offered a job to come back. He says, well, I never heard about it. My first radio job, and then this, happening, I was shocked. And I knew that I hadn't misunderstood. I mean, we had gone out to lunch. I didn't have anything in writing. I didn't have a tape recording or anything, so it's my word against his word. But that was really, really bracing. So then, I have a 2-year-old son. My husband was working in the restaurant industry, I think, at the time. And so I just started applying everywhere for part-time jobs here and there. Like I applied, at WIP, I don't know anything about sports, but I just anywhere that there was a job opening. And there was actually a job opening at WXPN for Kathy O'Connell's Kids Corner for producer. And I went over to interview her. She's like, Debbi Calton. She says, I listened to you. What are you doing, interviewing for a producer job? I said, I'm just looking for a job. Well, I ended up not taking it, which turned out, although I would have loved to have worked there, and I would have loved to have worked with Kathy. But it turns out then several months down the road that MGK was getting ready to change format. And Andy Bloom, who I'd worked with, who had been my program director at YSP, was now working with Greater Media, who owned WMGK. And he said, I can't tell you what the format is changing to, but you would be perfect for it. So I just need you to go in and talk to the program director. And I had never listened to MGK before. All I knew was like Delilah. And Harvey, who I knew Harvey. Harvey had gone to high school with my husband, so I knew Harvey. But I thought, I am not cut out for like an easy listening, middle of the road kind of station. But again, they had assured me that the format was changing. And so it did. It changed to greatest hits. They were still calling themselves Magic, but it was greatest hits of the 70s. And Mike Bowe had started sort of bringing that in with a Saturday night special show. And eventually the format changed to that. And so it was really fun because there was rock in there, but there was always country, like anything that came out in the 70s, anything. So you could be playing Afternoon Delight next to Bad Company, next to Joni Mitchell. I mean, it was next to the Spinners, I mean, it was wild. And eventually that format started being brought in more specifically. And then classic hits, then classic rock. And that's how I ended up at MGK. And I went through, I think it was 7 different program directors there. And several times it was, they did house cleaning. They got rid of pretty much everybody. And somehow I managed to hold on there. So I was at MGK for 27 years, I think it was, 27 years. In middays, the whole time, in the midday shift, which was amazing.
Now,
I'm so grateful.
it is amazing. And for 27 years, as you said, yeah, and people, it's people grow up with you. People, have kids, they're grandparents now. That's what always fascinates me when I talk to a lot of these musicians. They see 3 generations at the shows with concert search. Like the parents, the daughter, the little grandkid. But for you, what was it like seeing MGK? You were there from the get-go with the new format. It must have made you feel really good because then YSP ended up going to sports down the road, and for you that must have been like, fuck you. I mean, I hate to say it, but anyone who's an entertainer or in this kind of biz will always have a grudge against someone. I still have grudges against this comedy booker who wouldn't book me years ago. He's reached out to me on Facebook. I'm like, why? Because he wanted to get on my show. I'm like, dude, you wouldn't book me in like 1991. I'm not going to talk to you now.
Right. Yeah.
But what was it like for you to really feel you were on the beginning of a wave. I mean, that must be a great feeling to see it getting better and better.
It was. Well, first off, my first thought, again, like when I got to MGK and doing middays, was going back to my very first job and that first owner who told me that I'd never go anywhere. And I remember looking, up his name and of course long dead and all that, but it was like, I hope you're seeing, I hope you're seeing what's happening, that I did not, I was hireable. I was good. I am good. Uh, but yeah, I definitely was a fuck you kind of moment. And what was even greater was that we had to wait it out for a while because they had a patent on the name Noontime Nuggets. But when I was able to start doing Noontime Nuggets at MGK, because that's what I did at YSP. Again, Randy Kotz had done it before me at YSP. But to be able to do that, and be able to say that again because people had associated me with Noontime Nuggets at YSP. That was the greatest thing. It's like, what a full circle this is, and who could have ever seen it? Yeah, I was very. I mean, I think for everybody, there's always this imposter syndrome too in any career. I've run across a lot of people where you just keep thinking, well, everything was a fluke, everything was luck, and for me, a lot of things I felt we're lucky that doors were open when I was there. It took me a long time to realize, yeah, that door can open, but you got to do what you have to do to stay there, to go through that door. And I finally started feeling, okay, well, maybe I do deserve, to be in this position that I'm in. It took me a long time to realize that. But the fact that I outlasted a lot of these people who again, the program director at YSP who never called me back after he offered me a job, the first program director that I had, to finally accept that, oh, okay, I was here for a reason. And again, and I retired on my own terms too. Now, God knows if I'd stayed another year or two, I probably would have been on the chopping block because everybody else has been. But to be able to do that was probably the most incredible thing of my career. To take a whole month. They did like 30 days of
Yeah,
Debbi,
30 days of Debbie.
And yeah, and I was able to revisit like I was able to play old air checks, was just kind of scary. But I could, interviews, they had people calling in wishing me, a great success and happy future. It was fantastic to be able to do that. Usually in radio, particularly when it's not of your choosing, but even when it is of your choosing to leave, they don't give you a lot of time to say goodbye. And I was so fortunate. Andre, it was great because he was given a day to say goodbye. I wish he could have had 30 days of Andre, but I think that probably, and DeBella also got to have, a long goodbye. Uh, um, so that was truly like one of the most wonderful thing probably that happened in my career.
So you had this long career. I have to ask you, who were some of the people that you met, musicians that you just couldn't believe you met? Like, I've done this with interviews. When I was in LA, I had Ed Asner come in the studio, and there's Ed Asner. His pants are pulled up close to his chest, and he's exactly what Ed Asner is, a legend. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought when I was watching Rich Man, Poor Man, when I was a little kid, that I'd interview Ed Asner. Who are some of the people that you met that you, looking back, go, you can't believe it?
Well, I was a huge Jackson Brown fan, like back in college. And I probably interviewed Jackson more than anybody else. And I've got a lot of funny Jackson stories, but I don't have time to tell them here. But one of my things, though, was every time I would interview Jackson again or like be around him or bring him up on stage, he never remembered me. And I was like, but we've talked all these different times. But so that was a thrill. Most of the people, I went back to like personal experiences, like Surrealistic Pillow, great Jefferson Airplane was one of the first albums I had mentioned earlier. And when I had Grace Slick in the studio, I'm like little 12-year-old Debbi, and she was just so much fun. Her handler, her tour manager, whatever, he kept, because she was doing an art show. So he wanted her to only talk about art. I'm like, are you kidding? I got Grace Slick in my studio. I'm going to talk music and about what that album meant to me. And she was wonderful because she told her handler to shut up. She says, I'm talking to Debbi, So that was wonderful. I met Bruce Springsteen back in 78. Little Steven I had on my show many times, and I grew to absolutely adore him. Um, Fireside Theater. were live on my air, were live on my show, and we had listened to their albums in college.
Phil Proctor.
And oh my God, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to keep up with these guys. They're going to be throwing out references, and I knew some of them. I didn't catch all of them, but they couldn't have been kinder or sweeter. They were just absolutely wonderful. Um, so, I mean, and I'm drawing a blank now, but there's plenty of other. Oh, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin. Oh my God. I was so thrilled because, again, Led Zeppelin fan since high school. And that he sat with me. I was doing, we used to do these rock art show live broadcasts. And artists who were in town would come by and go on the air. Sadly, something that doesn't really happen in radio too much anymore. But John Paul Jones was playing at the Tower, I believe, that night with a solo project he was doing, and sat with me for an hour and a half, 2 hours. That was the biggest thrill. Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane was a big thrill too. I don't know. And now that I think about it, of course they're going to all come tumbling out, but they were all pinch me moments. It's like, I can't believe this is happening. And again, I was so happy for little Debbie, little 12-year-old Debbie, who loved the music so much, that she was having a chance to do this. And she could have never imagined that this would be her life.
Now, tell me about your new show. Well, you're with Outside FM. Tell me what Outside FM is. I know you're on, I think, twice a week.
Do you know the name T. Morgan? T. Morgan's been around Philadelphia radio forever. T. Morgan was actually responsible for starting the first progressive radio station in Philadelphia. I'm not going to be able to remember exactly where that all started. He worked at IOQ for many years. But he was at the beginning, like there in the 70s or late 60s even, like a Michael Tierson sort of type, who worked who in the early days was bringing this to the masses, or attempting to, and they did. So T, I worked with at YSP and at MGK, and I remember him coming up to me on my last day at the radio station at MGK, and he said, I want to talk to you about a project that I'm doing, and I think you'd be a great part of it. I didn't have a clue that he was doing this thing, launching this online radio station. And again, the pandemic happened right after that. And so I thought, well, this could be really fun because it's all done. I've got a broadcast mic. I've got my laptop. I've got the software and everything. So I started doing the shows, and it's really, it's not just classic rock because I play jazz, or we all, can veer in different directions. I play some country and stuff like that. But it's freeform progressive radio. It's just like, for me, it's totally full circle. It's back to like what I was doing behind the scenes in those college radio days. And at my first radio station, where you can play pretty much anything you want to. And I do a thematic show. So I have my show a new show airs on Saturday mornings from 11 a.m. to 1, and then it's repeated on Tuesday evenings. And I do a thematic show. So like maybe I think the one that's coming up this weekend is the long and short of it. I did a couple of live shows, or like all live music recently. I'll be for Thanksgiving. I'll do a thanks and a giving show. And it is so much fun. And I got to tell you, I put more work into this show than I ever did because all the music was planned out, at commercial radio. So I have to think about, tempo and artists and timing and, just all of it. And so I put a lot of work into it, and it is, so much fun. It's a great outlet. It's a great release. And I'm still keeping my chops, by doing this. So
I have one final question.
Yes.
So when you retired, it was a part of your life for so long, especially at MGK. Did you miss it at first, and then now looking back, I know you're doing this other show. Do you sort of miss the everyday of and just having great listeners? Did you miss it when you first got out of it? Because it's got to be something that you were used to doing that from midday for 20 odd years.
Well, I prepared myself for it for a long time. I had a lot of conversations with my husband, with friends, because particularly about identity. It's like, am I still Debbi Calton? I mean, that is actually my name. So yes, I'm still Debbi Calton. But it's like, am I still Debbi Calton? you know, again, there are some things that don't come to you anymore, the free tickets, the interviews, and that sort of thing. Uh, but because I thought about it so long and how intertwined is my radio identity, although radio is what I've done, since I was 20, whatever. Um, I was prepared for it. I think in an odd way too, because the pandemic came right after that. The radio changed then. Like everybody started doing their broadcasts from their home. They were in the studio for a while, but then they were set up, and so they were isolated there too. So it made it a little bit easier for me to think about. Oh, well, I wouldn't even be in the studio anymore. Um, Feedback, or at least for a period of time. Feedback, because I answered, I was really one-on-one with listeners. Honestly, I had listeners who called every single day, who texted every single day. That was like kind of a big thing for me to not have that camaraderie anymore. However, Facebook, like probably my 5,000 friends on Facebook or whatever I have now is a lot of that is still made up of my listeners from MGK. We still stay in touch. I know that one of my everyday listeners, Armin, his wife is in the hospital right now, because I see his post still. I keep up. So that has really helped keep the bonds together there. And again, after I went to the radio station and saw Andre several months ago, and I saw how changed it was, I didn't miss that at all. I don't miss setting an alarm, even though my schedule was terrific, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., but I still had to set an alarm. And I did miss the camaraderie of the everyday too with the staff that I worked with. We were all very close and a team, particularly in the heyday where it was Debella and me, Andre and Ray. We were so very tight. We were a unit, and that was the best time. Um, yeah, I missed that, but I text those guys all the time too. I'm very close to them still. They're still in my life.
That's awesome. I want to thank you for taking the time. Now, people when they find your show, is it outsidefm.com?
It is, yes, uh-huh.
And that's on Saturdays from 9 till...
No, Saturdays from 11 to 1, and then it's repeated on Tuesdays from 8 to 10. If you go to outsidefm.com, first of all, you'll see and hear some other familiar people. Randy Kotz is on there now. Lynn Kratz, who worked at MMR for many, many, many years. She's there. Kathy Donnelly, who was a staple of like fill-ins and weekends and that sort of thing in Philly for many years. She's there. T. Morgan, again, who has a long history in Philadelphia. So there will be, maybe we'll be able to pull Andre in too. That would be great. But there are recognizable names. And again, it's the music that we are really loving to play, the music that we all started out with in radio.
So people go check out Debbi on Outside FM. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find 1,026 episodes. Go to YouTube. The Coop Tank is my weekly business show. I sit at a round table with 3 business owners from the area, from South Jersey area, and we talk for an hour about insightful things, goals and stuff like that. And also my other new YouTube show with Comedy Trainwreck out of Philadelphia, it's Coop's Comedy Corner. I've had some great people on. I just had Rick Overton on. I've had Steve Scrovan, who's an Emmy winner, Wendy Liebman, Rich Scheidner will be coming up. So check them all out. And you can email me at cooper@coopertalk.net. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.